Okay, hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. This is our 29th Knowledge Bite session, which is awesome. We have such a really diverse archive of economic development and workforce development tools and resources. Today we have Jonathan Cooper from Bennington County Regional Commission and Bennington County Industrial Corporation to talk about future-ready trends in economic development. For those of you who have not been to one of these before, these are just to provide high-level introduction to topics around economic and workforce development. These sessions are recorded and archived, and also we provide the PowerPoint. Typically, we provide the PowerPoint that's shared in the presentation. It'll be about 20 minutes from Jonathan Cooper, and then 10 minutes of questions. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and type them into that chat function, and we can get to them as we can. And then at the end, Gretchen and Tim, I'll unmute you so it can be more of a conversation if need be. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Jonathan so he can get us started. So bear with us one moment. Great. Jonathan, I can see your screen just fine.
Okay. And so thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction and for inviting me to participate today. And if there are any issues with the audio, please do let me know, one and all. So the topic here is future-ready economic development organizations, and this is the result of actually the situation with the Southern Vermont Economy Project that Sarah manages. A few months ago, I had sort of asked that I thought this webinar series was coming together, and I thought perhaps it might be an interesting thing to participate in, and SVEP was able to sponsor my attendance in this series of 5 webinars that were put together by the International Economic Development Council as a sort of follow-up to the publication of a report from their research arm, Preparing for Tomorrow's Economy, Future Ready. And you can see the webinar titles there on the left, sort of going through some topics and trends to do a little prognostication, a little bit of crystal ball work, and to give some good take-homes for economic developers and other concerned citizens, residents, etc. And so Sarah thought, well, yeah, why don't you go through this, and then you can sort of distill what comes up in that webinar series into one for the knowledge bites, which makes sense. One interesting thing that came up during the course of this was on the day of the future of infrastructure, my daughter was born, and she's 9.5 pounds that day and full of infrastructure for use in the future. So it dovetailed quite nicely. But in any event, one of the things in the report that I wanted to start off with, I think it's pretty helpful, was this framework that they came up with about the sort of 6 different sectors, you might say, that are part of an economic development organization's operations. And you see in the sort of blue, the blue center, the dark blue in the center, those are really describing the organization itself. The next sort of ring out is the topics they may influence in their jurisdiction, and then the outer edge are those sort of topics or issues to be aware of. And that's really sort of a representation of how economic development is circumscribed by the knowledge economy, and you need to be aware of some entities of climate change or emerging technologies and how they apply to what we're doing. So one of the interesting things here to look at, for example, is in that technology sort of wedge or slice, that's the software systems that you utilize, the programs that you utilize to sort of give you an element of control over sort of how your programming is delivered. And so, for instance, here we're making use of some virtual, knowledge sharing, information sharing. And recently, I work at the Bennington County Regional Commission, where we do a lot of GIS mapping for the constituent municipalities that we serve here in southwestern Vermont. And as a result, ArcMap, ArcGIS, and Esri began to expand their suite of services into sort of economic development modeling and spatial analysis And it was an example where, well, if we're going to move into the economic development sphere a little bit from just from a straight regional planning commission into some development corporation activity, this was an opportunity to sort of road test some of the services that we had access to. Some of the things from that report that I thought were valuable there on the left, that awareness really becomes the bona fides and what makes the demonstrating competence to the public, to private businesses that may be interested in doing business in an area or expanding, or training, and retaining. But it was sort of important to get across that down at the bottom, that change is an opportunity to understand it and embrace it. It's only going to be disruptive if you don't sort of lean in that way. The following slide is just to perk everybody up. And this was an interesting line from one of these webinars about how today's systems are never built for the next pivot. Sometimes it feels a little bit odd to be talking about sort of jargon, like pivots, operationalize, things of that nature. But and it can give the sense of things changing all at once, which really is not quite the sort of approach and pace that we feel maybe comfortable with here in Southern Vermont. But it's worth bearing in mind that not all pivots are disasters or major disruptions. Sometimes they can make the previous status quo seem a little odd. For all of us recall, up until the 2000s, getting your physical paper checks that you sent during the previous billing cycle back to you. And it's kind of interesting to think about just how much time, energy, and effort must have gone into getting those pieces of paper mailed all around the country from one bank to another so that they could come back to you. And today it seems a little bit odd that that was ever a priority, or that was the thing that needed to happen. But now, obviously, we've moved on from that. But it's just an example, a pretty good one, I think, of how pivots sometimes, or disruptions, don't necessarily feel that disruptive. They just, if they're good, you may not notice them at all. So there were 5 webinars, as I mentioned at the beginning, and so I'll kind of give some highlights from each of them. The first one is thinking about the future, and here is obviously a picture of the past. And it was amusing that realizing that people can work from anywhere, and that one of the results from that is that companies are taking less office space per employee. And sort of a corollary, what followed from that was that, well, maybe some of our key institutions, whether they're hospitals, colleges, and business parks specifically, may be overbuilt. They have physical assets they no longer are interested in using, or ones that are actually unable to, that become a drag on their operations. And so that has a lot of implications for towns, where we depend on the growth of our real estate tax base to provide our public services. But I thought was worth mentioning is that there's much more interest now here in Southern Vermont in these smaller floor areas, these smaller 2,500 to 10,000 square foot sort of spaces. That's really what's sort of attracting a lot of attention these days in development for light industry. And the 25,000 and up, the 50,000, maybe some technology for automation, production practices has really made that amount of space a little less common as a necessity. But there's something interesting in that we have some potential business opportunity for those institutions that have that sort of spare space, that these smaller parcels, these condos for startups or other initiatives may in fact make some sense. A little more distributed. We have a model of the business incubator, the old mill or what have you, the one building where the incubating happens. Something that's emerging, or may emerge in the years to come, is that something really tailored to the host building can be in there, and there's it can be a sensible talent pipeline option. And this isn't something that's just happening in Pittsburgh. This actually flows from the conversation I was having with a local business owner who had purchased the building and was thinking, if there's some makerspace elements there in the shop where we have some extra space, that's a good way for me to see who's talented and who I might want to bring aboard. In any event, one of the big take-homes from this webinar is that the modern telecommunications infrastructure is just necessary, even no matter how rural you are. And so that's something where I know the Connectivity Summit has been pushing on this for a number of years. A lot of legislators in Southern Vermont see this as a priority that it is, but it's from the economic development perspective, the practitioner perspective, that couldn't be more true. And one final takeaway from that was the know thyself of the Oracle at Delphi, that overselling, overpromising is a waste of time and energy when we don't have a whole lot of time and our energy is allocated to many other initiatives. that our assets and our limitations put together give us a sense of what we should be bringing to market as we market our region, our municipality, our village, etc. The second webinar on the future of infrastructure was a pretty interesting look at just how that broadband-centered sort of initiative what it could mean to a whole lot of rural communities, especially. And there were some little bit of data points that thought is that by 2030 we're looking at virtual meetings far more frequently than we are looking at face-to-face meetings. The visual communication really establishes trust between parties, and that has a lot of implications for businesses across southern Vermont that have a customer base that's beyond the town center or the storefront. Sheila Harden of Bennington Potter made an interesting observation that when people come into the shop, the product is the pottery. When people are online at their website looking at things to purchase, the product is really what they're seeing on the website, and that's a different thing. And so that visual communication is a really integral part and can mean a whole lot for businesses in southern Vermont that have that broader customer base. A fascinating topic that came out of this was that augmented reality had these applications that go beyond Pokemon Go, which just had people staring at their phones walking around in the middle of the town. And it's interesting, that brings people out into town centers or into these unexpected places. But there's been some applications of augmented reality to enhance street life, to sort of be engaging and informative, educational sort of experience. One, for example, that's in many of our towns, there's streams that are running underneath the streets, or that haven't been daylighted for a long time, and so some projectors that have been sort of set up that are able to beam that sort of riparian network, so people in the downtown can see that they're on top of a whole other system, a natural system that is still functioning and active beneath their feet. And those sorts of things that can be a relevant and charming way of communicating a sense of place. One of the major take-homes is that there's a lot of ways to provide broadband, and that keeps expanding. There's, we've seen a lot of feasibility from balloons, like weather balloons, et cetera, that are suspended. So there's not just fiber and cables. There are other ways, and a blend is welcome. But where communities have a municipal electric utility, those entities are getting in the game as providers. They do have the physical infrastructure, the poles and wires, that can make them a relevant player. But the major take home here was that the most successful projects, especially going to be in rural areas, need to be multi-purpose. So we saw that at the last Connectivity Summit with Kingdom Fiber up in Craftsbury. That there are healthcare services, libraries, schools, businesses, and that could grow with if this infrastructure is implemented. And so that sort of many hands, many users is really what can make a project go from a great idea to one that can bring down the USDA funding that may be required to get some of the infrastructure up and running. The third webinar was on the future of work and looking at elements of the gig economy and also what skill sets are needed amongst permanent full-time workers. And so a lot of the information that we'll see in this segment came out of some information coming out of the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I know Southern Vermont feels a long way away, but in looking at some of these skills demands, we see things that I think we would all agree we're hearing from employers in the area, and we're hearing from educators in the area that they're moving away from manual dexterity or visual, auditory, and speech abilities, which it's a little disheartening because it kind of seems like what's declining are the things that make us human. But moving into that analytical innovation, problem solving, that these are the skills that we need now, and we will expect to see more of, even more of, in the medium-term future. There were two interesting things to talk about here. On the right was sort of a realization that the skills gap is widening. This is being applied to manufacturing. It's important to note in an area where manufacturing makes up a fairly large base, a portion of our economic base, that we're seeing this issue around the country. That between in the next 5 or 6 years, we're going to fall short. Our manufacturing industry nationwide will fall short by 2 million jobs. That we need 3.5 and we're only going to be able to supply 1.5. That we see boomer retirements, that we see expansion, economic expansion, and unfortunately, what we're looking at is a deficit that has grown a great deal in a very short period of time. It's also, that skills gap is also kind of pointing us towards a cultural gap as well. That a notion of agility is sort of moved into a lot of different sort of industries. And this is one where there's two components to it. The mindset component, that the organization has the spirit of cooperation, makes makes its decisions in a quick manner, that prioritizes sharing information and a focus on innovation, and also is implementing tools and processes to bring that about. So it's okay to try something out, to fail fast, to see how a system could be improved. And we're only ever adopting new technologies to simplify processes. And it's meant that some employees are now considering their own workplaces in these terms, which is really different from how employees talked about their workplaces even just 20 years ago. But some of those, there's new terminology and perspectives that are sort of underpinning a new way of thinking about how to feel good about your employer. And it seems that 60% feel that they're in a position, they are in a workplace that's not agile, while a little under 20% do feel that way. And so we're looking at a new kind of evaluation from the workforce, and that's something to bear in mind as well. We're suddenly hearing terminology like this from our employers across Southern Vermont as they're thinking about the most current best practices. A little bit more data on this, and I think it's important. We talk a lot about automation, reduction of the workforce, and we're getting a sense on the left there about what are the preferred strategies for addressing the shifting skills needs. And we see that automation is the second most common one. Businesses are thinking, well, this is probably the way to go. But it's still the case that people just want to hire the right people. That is the likeliest way that people feel that their businesses will address these skills issues. Just hire the right people. Look for the new people, look for the folks and bring them aboard. And then retrain who you have on board already. A little less common was the notion of plugging into the gig economy, of bringing on freelancers or having temp staff or outsourcing to third parties. That's a little less popular, but it's good to see that new staff, so having our workforce be ready and having systems in place with our educational partners and our workforce development partners to bring new skills to our existing workforce are still two real tried and true methods that we think are going to stay popular in the years to come. And by and large, the workforces from this 100,000-foot view, about half the workforce doesn't really need new skills. They have what they need to have, and of those, and a quarter of the workers can be trained up within 3 months' time. So these aren't the heaviest lifts, and we're really only looking at a fairly small number that have a major retraining sort of forecast in their future of more than a year. So as a result, we see that grant funding for reskilling is essential. So the Vermont Training Program, the Department of Labor, they have funds available, and we do our best throughout Southern Vermont to make use of those funds. We're building our relationships and keeping those relationships with Montpelier intact. We have a lot of interactions with our Department of Labor representatives down here in Bennington County, and the same is the case over in Windham County. That's a relative strength of Southern Vermont's economic development professionals. They're pretty well plugged in with the Department of Labor and other initiatives like the Vermont Talent Pipeline Management that Alex Beck at BDCC has been putting a lot of time into. And that's an initiative of the Vermont Business Roundtable. So there's a lot of elements that are sort of seeing things the same way and generally looking to pull in the same direction. One thing that came up several times was how important community colleges are becoming. Just how much more of a role they're playing, and partially because the network campus model is ideal for serving the local needs of the business community. They can respond to what some key employers in different parts of the state need fairly quickly, and that there is, by having it be state funded, that there's and with access to federal and philanthropic support, there are certain risks that aren't taken on as smaller colleges throughout the state are sort of adjusting to some new mathematics that can be very challenging for continuing operations. And what you see on the right is the list there of some of the most important skills that we'll need. And this is where having this clarity between employer, labor, and community colleges and other elements of, say, Vermont State College system is essential. There's two more to discuss here. And it felt a little odd that the future of technology development and commercialization, it didn't always seem as if this was exactly what Southern Vermont was going to be looking at, but it was a little bit surprising. This notion came up that if you don't have the talent, you'll be fighting a losing battle. That's an anxiety that we hear a good bit of the time. But in looking at what was going to be the major investments that we're expecting in certain industries, or what industries we expect to see receiving major investments in the next few years, I was kind of shocked to see that, yeah, there's blockchain tech in Southern Vermont, there's artificial intelligence businesses, there's pop-up stores, there's subscription-based products, that software as a service model. Those are here, which means that the people and the talent are here. And we shouldn't be so surprised. We see a lot of that educational attainment tends to trend with gains in employment, therefore gains in prosperity, and that's something that Southern Vermont has as a relative competitive advantage over the U.S. as a whole, and that we do have a talented workforce and one that's making some entrepreneurial strides. So this is in some instances, we maybe feel that it'll be difficult to attract the next big thing. But some of the things that can be the next big thing are already here and have a toehold in the area. Now, when we look at some other major sources of innovation, we see it again in manufacturing, largely in technology. About 80% of the patents from 2015 in manufacturing were going towards high tech or medium to high tech. And it really dwarfs the amount of activity, patent activity throughout the rest of the sectors. Now, some is going to be about automation, but some is about skill building, some is about new production. But this highlights a regional disadvantage that I think should be mentioned. That down here in Southern Vermont, we're at as significant a distance as you can in the state from UVM's Office of Technology Commercialization. That's known as UVM Innovations. Building that pipeline out so that there is some access for our businesses to that knowledge base and skill set is essential and can pay real dividends and will help keep some of our innovative businesses in Southern Vermont and to prevent their relocation, for instance, up to Chittenden County. And finally, the notion of tech market evaluation, which is something that see how attractive is a place for this tech sector, is really just based on data that would be valuable for us to know anyway. And so I want to include those criteria here, as their evaluation is available, and it may help us get a sense for, okay, well, if we want to grow our population, if we want to grow our population for young families in particular, then how close are we to or far are we from Troy? How close are we to the numbers that you see coming out of Pittsburgh or something along those lines? But in any event, that's a sort of a roadmap for how to get a feel for where and how close or how far from some of that tech hotspot we may be. And lastly is the future of economic development practices. And this was kind of an interesting thing to see, the notion of governments working with startups. But there was a little bit more meat on this bone than I thought there would be. By and large, we sort of began economic development just smokestack chasing, right? Just trying to get new stuff to come in, And it's shaped over time. We've had our cluster segments, we had our cultural development segment, and now we're sort of in a consultant and counselor sort of role a lot of the time, sharing information, which is more what we'd expect to see. In the past, economic development could take place at the country club, Masonic halls, the Rotary, but there was social pressure to be a part of those organizations, and they still exist today and have important roles to play. But some of these traditional models have become a little bit outdated, and new approaches have emerged in their stead. And you can see there notion of we're looking now at recruiting talent, branding communities, helping our constituent municipalities, or villages, or regions position themselves to make best use of fair winds when they arise. And finally, this has some relevance to the Scott administration. Governments are beginning to think like a business. There's an observation made that public sector tech systems are usually a couple decades behind where the private sector is, largely because it's difficult to get tech at that scale. Certainly for many of you who work in municipalities, there's only 8 people in the office, and so getting a bespoke, tailored custom solution puts things well outside of an appropriate budget range. So some entrepreneurial approaches have come about to try to get past that barrier. And some examples here are these smart sensors on public trash cans. So during events, other moments when it's clear, DPW, Public Works needs to get out to this one and this one and this one to prevent litter from entering the streets. They found applications for essentially upping the amount of foster families who are interested in taking children and adding them to their families. And then some elements of predictive analytics and data so it can sort of let commuters know where there should be available parking spaces nearby transit stops to reduce frustration and loss of time. So there's a lot of applications that aren't simply about what we may traditionally think of with tech, in quotes, or apps. But it was surprising to see the City Innovates Foundation Startup and Residence Program, their client list. And there was the state of Vermont on the list. And when I looked into it a little bit more, it's the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And so they have implemented some third-party custom solution, and it's something that for customer management and resource management, and it's something therefore that if we adopt this language and begin thinking this way of economic development professionals, will certainly find a friendly ear and a sympathetic mind up in Montpelier, the leadership of Michael Sherlin. So I thought that was actually worth mentioning because it was not what I was expecting to see. There's the city of Oakland, there's San Francisco, and there's the state of Vermont. So finally, when we have to take questions, once we get just a moment, there were a couple of key issues to sum up. That with respect to automation, the concern is the loss of jobs, but which of our industries are most vulnerable? We don't have an enormous transportation sector, and that's one that's looking at a lot of automation reductions. But we do want to be aware of what skills will be required for the sectors we do have in Southern Vermont, and what skills we need in development. And so with workforce, if we want to be attracting top talent, then we need to be marketing not just why this is a great place to live, but also how there's opportunity to address some of these major challenges in whatever industry you're in. And certainly addressing any legal and administrative issues of operating in the gig economy will become more important in essentially clearing pathways so that people can move from that into something that has a retirement sort of component and that has health insurance into a more conservative or a less risky employment model. We do need to ensure that Southern Vermont is connected to the worldwide marketplace, and we do need to help our constituent communities, the communities where you all live and work, come up with a clear message to present to the world, and to find out where those residential values and those business values converge, because it's not always a given that they will. So some of these key action items that came out of this were that there needs to be a learning strategy to stay abreast of trends. What's bubbling up, and what are we seeing take roots in other rural areas? There was a sort of a willingness to get to know the jargon economy a little bit. It's just a way to, and if you hear differences in one sector that's big in your town or in your region, you may know that could be telling you something. If one key component is very old school and one key component is very new school, how are we going to be able to bridge that gap? And lastly, the opportunity to expand technology adaptation. Starting in the office is a way to demonstrate to business community and potential relocators that the future is here as well. So, Ethan, thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to listen to any sort of conversation or any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was really great. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. So feel free to ask away.
This is Tim Hagen. A couple of things. Are you getting that? Feedback? I'm going to turn it down when I'm talking.
Yeah, if you could turn it down, it's a little feedbacky.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of things I like there. The virtual reality thing about the water underground was really cool. It made me think of like a virtual haunted house or something that would be in a Halloween event that, walking around downtown having, scary things jump out at you. I thought that was pretty cool. Another thing that struck me was where you mentioned that the trend toward the importance of community college.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to reconcile that in my mind with what's happening here, the close of Southern Vermont College, and wondered if there's a pivot point there where we use Vermont College as, turn it into the coolest community college in the country or something like that, or is that really, I guess also questioning, is that really a trend there? I have trouble reconciling those two.
Well, it has been certainly, Hudson Valley Community College would be a great example of institutions that have become really essential to sustain with the local businesses and producing a talent pipeline. They've been able to sort of respond a little more quickly, and by and large, I think it's because faculty at community colleges are often drawn from the local business community, and so there's a lot of direct operational knowledge that can inform some curriculum shifts. It's a little bit more of a flexible arrangement, and certainly I know how, and on your previous points, Dr. Finch thought it is the case that the state college system in Vermont is not a major, is not as much of a priority in the legislature's allocation of funding to educational initiatives as it is in other states, and that cost is generally passed on to the students. It's one of the, if it's not the most expensive community college in the U.S., CCD is close to it, and this is something that I think, just about everybody is within 20 miles of a CCD campus in the state, and I think that a lot of information and input from the public about why this entity of state colleges could be empowered to play more of a role would be, I think, would make a lot of sense. And I do know how important Halloween is to Shaftesbury, so I think the haunted house idea makes a ton of sense.
Exactly.
Thanks, Tim. Gretchen or Mike, do you guys have any questions or comments on Jonathan's presentation?
No, that was great. Thank you. I have that same question about SVC. That was my alma mater, so yeah, it's scary. And congratulations, Jonathan, on your child.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Mm.
She's adorable. Well, great. I think if no one has any questions, I thought that was very, very interesting. I really like that timeline, Jonathan, of sort of like what economic development professionals have been providing. And I think for you and I, learning from Dr. Mullen at UMass, he always talked about like the chasing smokestacks idea or concept, and I think, in the work that I do, sort of trying to educate or provide information around economic development and like what that is today, I run into that a lot, is people thinking that it's, real estate, it's, attracting and retaining businesses, which it all is, but I think it's, people are having a harder time wrapping their head around the fact that like we are now sort of consultants and liaisons and guides, and it's a little more not like fluffy, but it's a little less concrete in that way. But I've definitely, through the Southern Vermont Economy Project, that's literally what the project is for consulting and connecting people, and so I just thought that was kind of an interesting concept, and that we started close to back to the dawn of time.
Yeah, it just it's interesting. One of the earliest practices or implementations of economic development was in the Greek city of Rhodes, and it was about essentially harbor fees, and another city whose name we don't recall because it lost the bidding war, where it was more expensive for merchants to unload their goods. Rhodes made a move to provide a more competitive price point, and they got their Colossus.
Amazing. All right. Well, unless there are any other questions, I think we can go ahead and close up. Jonathan, if you don't mind sending the PowerPoint, I'd love to post it on the Knowledge Bites webpage.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll also, because it's a small group, I'm happy to share that Future Ready report that IEDC produced as well. I can just send that along to our guest today, and for something to peruse in your spare.
That would be fantastic.
Perfect.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.